Who let this poor black woman in here to ruin the view of our luxury lobby?
Bradford Halloran sneered, flicking two manicured fingers with utter disgust at Imara's old wool coat. He didn't know he was looking at a massive billionaire CEO controlling a $500 million fund. Instead, he turned to the laughing crowd and barked,
Sweetheart, people like you don't belong in a platinum wealth firm. Take your welfare pennies and crawl down to the local credit union where you belong.
Imara stood completely frozen on the cold marble floor, tightly clutching her father's old brass stopwatch as the receptionist hissed,
Get this trash out before I call security to drag her out.
For 3 agonizing hours, they publicly degraded her, treating her like an invisible disease while waving wealthy elites through the VIP elevators with wide smiles. Corporate associates snickered behind her back, filming her on their phones to mock her online. But this arrogant firm just made the most expensive mistake in its 100-year history. They thought they were breaking a helpless woman, but they had no idea she carried a document that would completely destroy their empire. The absolute shock on Bradford's face when he discovers who she really is will satisfy you to your core. Stay tuned, because the legendary way this powerful woman serves immediate justice is a masterpiece you must see until the very last second. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from right now. And do me one favor, subscribe to this channel, because the way this story ends is something you will not want to miss. Not for a single second. Let me take you back to the beginning of that morning. Before the marble, before the laughter, before the most expensive mistake a 100-year-old firm ever made. The morning began with light. That was the part Imara Okonkwo would remember later. When everything else had turned hard and bright as the marble under her feet, she woke before her alarm in a quiet hotel suite and stood at the window, watching the city assemble itself out of the fog. The river went from slate to silver. The bridges stitched one shore to the other. She was 51 years old. She had built something out of nothing. And today, that something had a number attached to it that still felt unreal when she said it out loud. $500 million. That was the size of the mandate she was bringing into the world this morning. The capital she controlled on behalf of the people who trusted her. And she had chosen Halloran Brandt to be its very first call. Out of a quiet respect for an old institution and an old name, she dressed carefully, but not loudly. A charcoal wool coat, well cut, 10 years old and beautifully kept. A simple white blouse, flat shoes, because she had learned long ago that comfort was its own kind of armor. No jewelry except a thin gold band and her father's stopwatch, tucked into her coat pocket. The brass was worn smooth where his thumb had rubbed it for 40 years on the assembly line, counting his own minutes because no one else would count them for him. Her father would have understood that coat. He would have understood why a billionaire would still wear it. Joseph Vance had worked on a factory line for 40 years. He was a brilliant man, narrow and exact, with hands that could fix anything, and a mind that could hold 100 numbers at once. He should have been an engineer. Everyone who worked beside him knew it. He solved problems on the floor that the men with degrees in the offices above could not solve, and he solved them quietly. And he watched those same men collect the credit and the raises and the corner offices while he went home to count the week's wages against the week's bills at a kitchen table under a bare bulb. He never grew bitter. Or if he did, he never let his daughter see it. Which Imara understood much later was its own kind of heroism. The daily decision to keep the bitterness out of the house, so it would not poison the only thing he had managed to keep clean, which was her. What he gave her instead of bitterness was the stopwatch, and the counting, the line paid by the minute. And Joseph Vance did not trust the foreman to count his minutes honestly, because he had watched the foreman shave minutes off the cards of men who looked like him, while leaving the cards of other men untouched. So, he bought a brass stopwatch from a pawn shop with his own money, and he carried it, and he counted his own minutes, every single shift, for 40 years. He died at 68. 2 years before Imara placed her first real deal. With the stopwatch on the nightstand beside him, she took it home from the hospital in her closed hand, the way she now carried it into every room that mattered. He never saw a single floor of what she built, but she carried him into the lobby of Haller & Brandt all the same. In her pocket, in the worn brass, in the habit of counting, and that, as it turned out, was going to matter very much. She carried the heavy leather portfolio herself. She left the car service 2 blocks away and walked the last stretch on her own feet, in her own time, breathing the same air as everyone else. The lobby of Haller & Brandt was designed to make a certain kind of person feel they had finally arrived, and another kind of person feel they had wandered in by mistake. The ceilings climbed 3 stories. The floors were the color of cream and ash. A chandelier, the size of a small car, hung over a reception desk, carved from a single slab of stone, and behind that desk sat a young woman named Courtney, with a headset and a practiced smile that she handed out and pulled back like a coin she was unwilling to spend. "Good morning," Imara said. "I have an 8 o'clock appointment. My name is Imara Okonkwo. I'm here to see the senior team regarding a new account." Courtney's eyes did a small, familiar circuit. They went to the coat, which was good but old. They went to the flat shoes. They went to the face. And something behind them adjusted, recalculated, and downgraded. The smile thinned. "A new account," Courtney repeated, as though Imara had said something faintly amusing. "Do you have the paperwork?" "The intake forms. New clients usually go through our online onboarding first." "I'm not a new client, in the way you mean," Imara said gently. "I have an appointment. It was confirmed by email 3 weeks ago. The contact was Mr. Fadiet's, Reginald Halloran's office." A flicker of doubt. Then Courtney recovered, because she had been trained to recover, and the recovery took the shape of an obstacle. "Let me see," she said, and she typed for a long moment, and frowned at her screen, the way people frown when they have already decided what they are going to find. "I'm not seeing anything under that name for this morning." "Are you sure you have the right firm? There's a Haller & Brandt over on the east side that does smaller portfolios. People mix us up. I have the right firm," Imara said. The brass of the stopwatch pressed into her palm. "I'm quite sure," Courtney exhaled through her nose. "You can sit over there until someone has time for you." 2 fingers. A flick toward the row of chairs near the elevator bank. The chairs nobody important ever used. And just like that, barely a minute past 8 o'clock in the morning, the woman who had come to hand them $500 million had been filed away in the corner like a piece of furniture nobody had ordered. Imara sat. She did not argue. She had learned, across a lifetime of rooms exactly like this one, that arguing in the doorway only confirmed the thing they had already decided about her. Instead, she sat, and she crossed her ankles, and she took out her father's stopwatch, and she pressed the worn brass crown with her thumb, and she started it running. Click. The thin second hand began to sweep. She would let it count. She would let the room show her exactly what it was. The first hour, she watched the lobby breathe. She watched a man in a navy suit come through the revolving door and watched Courtney rise half out of her chair to greet him. Watched the smile become real and wide and warm. Watched her come around the desk to walk him personally to the elevator. Watched her laugh at something he said before the doors had even closed. He had not given a name. He had not shown a form. He had been waved up like sunlight, like good weather, like something the building was glad to have. He was white, and he was wearing the right coat. And that had been credential enough. She watched it happen again, 20 minutes later. A young man this time, easy and loud, who leaned on the stone desk and called Courtney by her first name and was sent up with a wink, and again, and again. The pattern assembled itself in front of Imara with the cold clarity of a balance sheet. There was one door for some people and a corner of chairs for others. And the sorting happened in the half-second it took to look at a face, and then she watched something that hurt her more than anything that had yet been done to her, because it was done to someone else, and she could do nothing about it. A woman came in. She was perhaps 35, in a coat even older than Imara's, carrying a folder pressed to her chest with both arms, the way a person carries something they are afraid of dropping and afraid of losing. She had the careful, over-prepared look of someone who had rehearsed this moment in a mirror, who had pressed her blouse the night before, who had read articles about how to speak in rooms like this one. Her name, Imara would learn much later, was Renata. She had come because her mother had died and left her a small inheritance, the first money her family had ever had to invest instead of merely survive. And she had read that Halloran Brandt was the best, and she had wanted, for once in her life, the best. Courtney did to Renata exactly what she had done to Imara, only faster, because Renata had less in her posture to give the receptionist pause. The eyes did the circuit. The coat, the folder held like a shield. The downgrade, the Community Credit Union, 4 blocks south. They do wonderful work with accounts of your size. Renata's face did a thing that Imara recognized from the inside. A small collapse, quickly hidden. The face of a person absorbing a message they have absorbed many times before and had hoped, this, once, in this marble room, on this particular morning, not to absorb again. She did not argue. She thanked Courtney, which was the worst part. She actually thanked her, and she turned and walked back out through the revolving door, with her mother's money still pressed to her chest. Imara watched her go and felt the old anger move in her chest. Banked low, controlled, the way her father had taught her to hold it, because anger that escapes the body too early only proves the room right. But she made a private vow in that moment, sitting in the corner with the stopwatch running, and the vow was not about herself at all. She was going to be fine. She had a document in her portfolio that would make this whole building tilt on its foundation. Renata had no document. Renata had a folder pressed to her chest, and a dead mother's savings, and a thank dismissal at a stone desk. And there were 10,000 Renatas walking out of 10,000 lobbies that very morning, and not one of them had a stopwatch to hold up. Whatever Imara did with this day, she decided, it could not only be about the $500 million. It had to be about the folder pressed to the chest. It had to be about the door that closed so gently the woman had said thank you. At 9:15, she rose and went back to the desk. "Excuse me," she said. "It's been an hour and 15 minutes. Could you check again on my appointment, Imara Okonkwo?" 8 o'clock. Courtney did not look up from her screen. "I told you. I don't have anything. Someone will come down when they can." There was no warmth in it, and no apology. Only the flat administration of a decision that had been made about Imara before she ever opened her mouth. "Please take a seat." The second hour. Imara worked. She had a phone. And on that phone was the architecture of an empire. And she answered the messages that needed answering, and approved the things that needed approving, and declined, with great courtesy, 3 opportunities that were not quite right, all from the wrong chair in the wrong corner of a lobby that had decided she was no one. Her people texted her from across the city. "The capital is ready when Halloran confirms." She typed back, "Calme," still waiting on them. "Patience," and waiting in that corner, with nothing to do but watch and remember. She thought of the first time a door had closed on her. Because a chair in a corner has a way of opening every door that has ever closed. She had been 26. She had walked into a firm not so different from this one, with a resume better than anyone they hired that year. And she had sat across a desk from a man who never quite looked at her, who asked her where she was really from, who said, at the end, that she was impressive, but that he worried she would not be comfortable with their client base, and that he was saying it for her own good. She had thanked him. She had walked out into the street and stood there, shaking, not with rage, but with the terrible doubt the rooms plant in you, the whisper that maybe the room is right. Maybe you don't belong. Maybe you reached too high. She had gone home and taken out her father's stopwatch, newly inherited. Then, the brass still strange in her hand, and she had sat at her own kitchen table under her own bare bulb and pressed the crown and watched the second hand sweep. And she had heard her father's voice as clearly as if he were in the room. When a room decides you are no one, the room is telling you the truth about itself, not about you. She had decided that night, at 26, with a closed door still stinging on her face, that she would build her own room. It had taken 25 years, and now here she sat, 51 years old, with $500 million in a leather portfolio and the same stopwatch in her hand. And the rooms were still doing the same arithmetic they had done when she was 26. The only thing that had changed was that this time, she carried something in her portfolio that would make the room answer for it. She pressed the crown. The watch ran on. It was during the 4th hour that the man came down. Imara knew his species on sight, because she had spent 30 years among them and outlasted most of them. He stepped off the elevator with the proprietary stride of a man who owned the floor, the building, and a fair portion of the city's good opinion of itself. Silver hair, swept back, a suit that cost more than Courtney made in a month. Ring. He was Bradford Halloran, grandson of the founder, head of the private client division, and he had been told, vaguely, on his way to a more important meeting, that there was some confusion in the lobby about an appointment. He did not approach Imara. He approached Courtney, and the two of them conducted a small conference about Imara over Imara's head, as though she were hard of hearing, or absent, or a problem with the furnace. "What's the situation?" Bradford said. "She says she has an 8 o'clock. Courtney murmured, There's nothing in the system. She's been here a while. Bradford turned then and looked at Imara fully for the first time. And Imara watched him perform the exact arithmetic Courtney had performed 3 hours earlier. The coat, the shoes, the face, the downgrade. And then he did something worse than ignore her. He decided to be entertained by her. "Who let this poor black woman in here to ruin the view of our luxury lobby?" he said, loud enough for the whole floor to hear, flicking 2 manicured fingers with utter disgust at her old wool coat. A few of the younger associates drifted out of a glass conference room to watch. The way people gather at the edge of a small and entertaining cruelty, Bradford played to them. "Sweetheart," he said, "people like you don't belong in a platinum wealth firm. Take your welfare pennies and crawl down to the local credit union where you belong." The associates laughed. One of them lifted a phone and began to film, grinning, already composing the caption in his head. Behind the desk, Courtney leaned forward and hissed, "Get this trash out before I call security to drag her out." Imara stood completely still on the cold marble floor, her father's brass stopwatch tight in her hand. She did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She had never, in 30 years, needed to raise her voice, because she had learned that the people who must shout have already lost the room. And she did not intend to lose this one. He could have stopped there. Imara would think about that later. In the calm aftermath of everything. How many places there had been along the way where the morning could have turned, where a single different choice would have spared the firm what was coming. Bradford could have simply asked, in plain courtesy, who she was and why she had come, and the entire collapse would have been avoided by one ordinary act of respect. But the machine did not stop, because the machine was built not to stop. And the worst of it, the part that pressed the brass hard into Imara's palm, was that the man delivering the cruelty believed, with his whole heart, that he was simply protecting his standards. He would go home that night and tell his wife he had handled a difficult situation in the lobby. He would believe it. That was the machine. From the inside, it never felt like cruelty. From the inside, it felt like common sense, and that was precisely what made it deadly. Imara looked at him with an expression of perfect, unhurried calm, and she said, "How long have I been sitting in that chair?" "Mr. Allerin, I'm sorry. How long?" she said again. Pleasantly, "I've been keeping time." She lifted her father's stopwatch between them, the brass catching the chandelier light. 3 hours, 12 minutes, and some seconds. I watched you and your receptionist send 11 men upstairs in that time, without a single form between them. I counted. I have a habit of counting. My father taught it to me. She clicked the crown and stopped it. The lobby had gone quiet. The associates were not laughing now. Bradford's smile had stiffened into something brittle. "I don't think I appreciate your tone," he began. "You don't have to appreciate it," Imara said. Still gentle. Still terribly calm. "You only have to listen for the next 90 seconds. Because I am going to give you a choice, and the firm that has stood on this corner for 100 years is going to depend on which one you make." She opened the leather portfolio. She did not hurry. She took out a single bound document, heavy, on cream stock, the cover embossed with the discreet silver mark of an institution that everyone in private wealth knew and feared in equal measure, and she set it on the stone desk where Courtney could see it, and Bradford could see it, and the whole frozen lobby could see it. Sovereign Meridian Capital. The cover read, and beneath it, smaller, Mandate Placement Agreement. And beneath that, the figure, $500 million. Iam imaravanze okonkvo, she said into the silence. I am the founder and chief executive of Sovereign Meridian. This document authorizes the placement of a $500 million mandate with a single firm of my choosing. Your firm reached out to me. Mr. Halloran, your grandfather's name reached out to me 3 weeks ago by email and asked for the privilege of being considered first. I came this morning to give you that privilege. I have been sitting in your corner for 3 hours and 12 minutes, while you sent 11 men upstairs without a single question, and then you came down personally to call me trash and tell me to crawl to the credit union. There was no sound in the lobby at all now. Somewhere, a phone rang, and no one answered it. The associate who had been filming had stopped and gone very still. The particular stillness of a young man recalculating his entire future in the space of a few seconds, realizing that the thing he had grinned at and would have forgotten by lunch had just become the most important moment of his career, and not in the way he would have wanted. Courtney at the desk had both hands flat on the stone, as though to keep herself upright, and every person who had drifted into that lobby to watch a small, entertaining cruelty now understood, all at once, that they had been watching something else entirely, that the woman in the old coat had been the most important person in the building from the moment she walked in, and that they had spent 3 hours and 12 minutes proving, on camera, in marble, exactly how little that had mattered to them. Until the number came out of the folder. Bradford Halloran had gone the color of the marble. He reached for the document, and Amara closed the portfolio over it, unhurried, and drew it back toward herself. You misunderstand, he said, and his voice had cracked in the middle of it. Ms. Okonkwo, there's been a terrible administrative error. The appointment must have been entered wrong. Courtney, the appointment. How did this? He wheeled on the receptionist, who had gone white and small. You should have told me who she was. She didn't know who I was, Imara said quietly. And that is precisely the point. None of you knew. That is the entire point. You decided who I was the moment I walked through that door. And you have spent 3 hours proving to me exactly how this firm treats a person it has decided is no one. I am very grateful to you. Mr. Halloran, you have shown me something I needed to see before I trusted you with $500 million of other people's futures. She slid the portfolio back under her arm. She picked up her father's stopwatch and returned it to her pocket. And she turned toward the revolving door. Wait, Bradford said. His composure was entirely gone now. He came around the desk after her, and the proprietary stride had become something close to a stumble. Ms. Okonkwo, please, wait. Let me get Mr. Reginald. Let me get the whole partnership down here. We can fix this. This isn't who we are. This was one mistake. One terrible. It was not one mistake, Imara said. Stopping. Turning. She was not cruel about it. She was only exact. And exactness was somehow worse. It was a receptionist, and a managing partner, and associates who laughed and filmed, and 11 men sent up without a form, and in order to drag me out like trash. It was a system. Mr. Halloran, one mistake is an accident. What I watched this morning was a machine doing precisely what it was built to do, and she added, more softly, because she had spent a lifetime learning the difference. The cruelest part is that you were comfortable. You were so comfortable, you thought you were simply protecting something worth protecting. The revolving door turned, and she was gone, and Halloran Brandt stood in the wreckage of its own lobby. And the stone desk held nothing but the impression of where $500 million had been set down and lifted away. What happened after that did not happen all at once. The collapse of a thing built over 100 years rarely does. It happens in stages. The way a building comes down, the first crack invisible, the structure sound until suddenly it is not. Imara did not make a single phone call in anger. That was not her way. And it was not her father's way. She walked the 2 blocks back to her car, and she sat in the quiet of it for a moment, with her hands in her lap. And then she did the only thing she had ever done when a door was shut in her face. She got to work. By early afternoon, her general counsel had a calm, factual letter on its way to Reginald Halloran, the 80-year-old patriarch whose name was on the building, informing him that Sovereign Meridian had withdrawn its mandate from consideration and would be placing it elsewhere, and stating, without heat, the reasons. By 2 o'clock, the second firm Imara had quietly kept in reserve, a younger institution run by a managing partner named Diane Okafor, who had answered Imara's first email herself within 19 minutes, had received the mandate and the trust that came with it. The $500 million went where it was treated as $500 million, and where the woman carrying it was treated as a woman carrying it. But the letter to old Reginald Halloran was the stone that started the slide. Because Reginald Halloran was many things, vain and proud, and 100 years deep in the assumptions of his class. But he was not a stupid man. And when he read what his grandson had done, he understood instantly that it was not a story about one lost account. It was a story about what his firm had become when he wasn't watching, and it was a story that was going to get out. It got out faster than even he feared. The young associate who had filmed the encounter had already sent the clip to a group chat, with a caption mocking the woman in the old coat. The clip showed the moment Imara held up the stopwatch. It showed Bradford flicking his fingers and calling her trash. And then, because the world is not always unjust, it showed the document going down on the desk, and the figure, and the color leaving Bradford Halloran's face. The clip did not stay in the group chat. By evening, it was everywhere. The caption the world wrote over it was not the associate's caption. The world watched a black woman stand with perfect dignity for 3 hours while a firm decided she was nobody. Watched her hold up a stopwatch her father had carried on an assembly line. Watched her lay down $500 million and pick it back up and walk out without ever once raising her voice. And the world understood exactly what it was looking at. It was looking at the most ordinary thing in the world, dressed up in marble. It was looking at the thing that happens in smaller rooms, to smaller people, with no stopwatch and no $500 million to make the room finally see them. That was why it traveled. People did not share it because it was rare. They shared it because they recognized it. Insida Halloran Brandt. The days that followed had the quality of a slow-motion catastrophe that no one could find the controls to stop. The phones did not stop ringing, but the calls were not the calls the firm was used to. They were existing clients, old families, careful people who had kept their money at Halloran Brandt for 2 and 3 generations, and they were calling to ask, in the polite and chilling way that the very wealthy ask such things, whether the firm could explain what they had seen. A pension board that had been weeks from signing a substantial mandate sent a one-line message withdrawing from discussions. Two members of the firm's own advisory council resigned rather than be associated with the clip. The financial press, which had ignored Halloran Brandt for years as a sleepy old name, suddenly remembered it existed. And the coverage was not kind. And it was not wrong. The associate who had filmed the clip was gone within 72 hours. Not because he had filmed an injustice, but because he had filmed it to mock the woman who suffered it. And that distinction, which the firm had been incapable of making in its own lobby, the world made instantly and without mercy. And Bradford Halloran, who had built his entire identity on the certainty of his own good judgment, sat in his glass office above the city and watched the firm his great-grandfather had founded come apart around him, and understood, slowly, with a horror that did not lessen, that he had done it. Not the woman in the coat, not the clip, him, 1/2 second of arithmetic in a lobby, performed so many times it had stopped feeling like a choice. And 100 years of a family name was sliding down the marble he had been so proud of. Imara watched none of this with satisfaction. She watched it, when she watched it at all, with a kind of weary recognition, because she had been the woman in the chair before. Many times. In years when there had been no document in the portfolio to make the room reverse itself, she thought of those years. She thought of the rooms she had left with nothing. She thought of all the women still sitting in corners that very morning, who would never have a stopwatch to hold up. And the thought did not make her feel vindicated. It made her feel responsible. So when Reginald Halloran called her himself, 3 days later, his old voice careful and shaken on the line, asking, almost pleading, whether she would consent to meet, she said yes. Not because she had forgiven Halloran Brandt. Forgiveness was not the matter at hand. She said yes because she had begun to see the shape of something larger than one account and one apology. And she wanted to be in the room where it was decided. They met in a conference room high above the city. The same building, a different floor. And this time no one made her wait. Reginald Halloran was there, frail and upright, his hands folded on the table to keep them still. Bradford was there, a man visibly unmade, who could not at first meet her eyes. Diane Okafor was there at Imara's invitation. The firm's general counsel was there, and at Imara's quiet insistence, so was Courtney, the receptionist, who sat at the far end of the table with her hands in her lap and the look of someone waiting to be sentenced. I asked for this meeting to apologize. Reginald began, and his voice did not waver, but it cost him not to let it. What was done to you in my lobby was indefensible. I have read the account. I have watched the recording. I am ashamed in a way I did not know I could still feel at my age. He paused. I want to make it right. I am prepared to make it right, in any way you name. We will issue a public apology. We will pay whatever. I don't want your money. Mr. Halloran, Imara said. I have money. That was never what this was about. And you know it. She let that sit. Money was never going to fix what I watched in that lobby. Because what I watched in that lobby cannot be fixed with money. It can only be changed. And the two are not the same. The old man's hands tightened on the table. He was a proud man. And pride dies hard. And even in his shame, some part of him reached for the comfortable explanation. Ms. Okonkwo, he said carefully. I want you to know that what happened to you does not reflect this firm. We have served clients of every kind for 100 years. This was the failure of a few individuals on a single morning, and I assure you it is not who we are. It is exactly who you are, Imara said, gently, without heat, but she did not let the sentence stand. That is the comfort every institution reaches for. Mr. Alaran, and it is the lie that lets the thing continue. A few bad individuals, a single bad morning. If that were true, your receptionist would have hesitated. Your managing partner would have asked a question. One of the 11 men you waved upstairs would have looked at me sitting in that corner for 3 hours and wondered why. Somebody, in 100 years of somebody, would have built a door that did not need to be told to let me through. No one did. That is not a few individuals. That is the water the whole building swims in. So clean and so clear that the fish inside it have never once noticed they were wet. I am not telling you this to wound you. I am telling you because you cannot fix a thing you will not name. And you have just tried, in front of me, to avoid naming it. Even now, even after everything, that is how strong the water is. The room was silent. Reginald Halloran looked down at his own folded hands for a long moment. And when he looked up, something in his face had given way. Some last wall of 100 years. And he said, quietly, "You are right. Forgive me. Even now. You are right. Go on. Tell me what you want." But before Imara could answer, a small voice came from the far end of the table. It was Courtney, and she had not been asked to speak. And she spoke anyway, because the thing inside her could no longer be held. "I knew," she said. Everyone looked at her. She was very pale, and her hands were shaking. And she made herself say it anyway. "I want to say it out loud, because I've been sick about it for 3 days. I didn't make a mistake. That's the thing I keep wanting to call it. A mistake. Like I typed the wrong name. I didn't. I looked at her, and I decided I do it 20 times a day. I've done it for 2 years, and nobody ever told me to stop. And the truth is, nobody had to tell me to start. I just knew. I knew who got the smile, and who got the chairs. And I never once asked myself how I knew." She was crying now. Openly. I turned away another woman that same morning. Before her, a woman with a folder. I don't even know her name. I said the exact same words to her. And she said, "Thank you." And she left. And I forgot about her by lunch. She looked at Imara. Stricken. I forgot about her by lunch. That's the part I can't live with. Not that I did it to you. That I did it to her. And it was so normal. I forgot. Imara looked at the young woman for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, "Her name is Renata. And the fact that you remember her now, when you could have kept forgetting her forever, is the only reason I am going to fight to keep you in this building. Instead of letting them put you out in the street to make themselves feel clean, remember her, whatever else you do for the rest of your life. Do not let yourself forget her again." The old man looked at Imara, and his eyes were wet. "Then tell me what you want." Imara had thought about this for 3 days. She set her hands on the table, and beside her right hand, where everyone could see it, she set her father's brass stopwatch. "I want you to understand who I am," she said, "and who he was, because then you might understand what you nearly lost." and why it matters. My father worked on an assembly line for 40 years. He was a brilliant man, a man who could have run a firm like this one. And he never sat in a chair like the one I sat in for 3 hours. Because he was never permitted into the building at all. He carried this stopwatch every one of those 40 years. Because the line paid him by the minute. And he did not trust them to count his minutes honestly. So he counted them himself. He taught me to count. He taught me that when a room decides you are no one, the room is telling you the truth about itself, not about you, and that your only job is to keep your dignity intact long enough for the truth to come out. That is what he gave me. That is the only inheritance that mattered. She touched the brass. He died before I built any of this. He never saw a single floor of it. So when your grandson told me to crawl to the credit union, Mr. Allerin, he was not insulting me. He was insulting my father. And my father is not here to hold up his own stopwatch. So I held up mine. The room was very quiet. At the end of the table, Courtney had her hand pressed to her mouth. Here is what I want, Imara said. I want it because I am thinking of every person who will walk into a lobby like yours tomorrow, with no document in their portfolio and no name you recognize. They are the ones who pay for what I watched. Not me. I walked out and placed my mandate elsewhere and lost nothing. They lose everything. Every single day. In 1,000 quiet ways that never get filmed, she laid it out, point by point, in the calm voice of a woman who had already drafted it in her mind. She did not want a settlement. She wanted Halloran Brandt to fund, publicly and substantially, an independent program, run not by the firm, but by an outside board, that would audit how private wealth institutions across the industry treated the people who walked through their doors, sending in clients of every background, and measuring, with cold and unanswerable data, exactly who was made to wait and who was waved up. She wanted the findings published. All of them, including the ones about Halloran Brandt. She wanted the firm to commit to transparent intake. A single door for every person who came in. The same forms. The same greeting. The same chair. No half-second arithmetic in the lobby ever again. And she wanted Courtney, at the end of the table, not fired, but trained, paid to learn, made into the first and best example of what the new door looked like. Because a system that only punishes its smallest cog and protects its largest beam has learned nothing at all. Bradford spoke then, for the first time, and his voice was not the voice of the man who had flicked his fingers in the lobby. It was smaller and more human, and it shook. I should be the one who's fired, he said. Not her. It was me. I'm the one who came down. I'm the one who decided. He looked at Imara. I have thought about almost nothing else for 3 days. I keep telling myself I was just protecting the firm's standards. And every time I tell myself that, I hear how it sounds. And it sounds exactly like what it was. I don't expect you to believe that I'm ashamed. But I am. I believe you. Imara said simply. Shame is the beginning of something. If you let it be, it can become change. Or it can become self-pity. And the difference is whether you do the work afterward. She looked at him steadily. You will do the work. You will help build the very program that publishes how badly your own firm treated me. You will sit on no board and control no outcome. But you will fund it. And you will let it embarrass you. and you will keep funding it when it does. That is your work. If you do it, in 10 years, you will be a different man. And so will this firm. If you don't, you will be exactly who you were in that lobby. Only older. And that is the worst thing I can imagine for anyone. Reginald Halloran was quiet for a long moment. Then the old man did a thing the room would remember for the rest of their lives. He rose, slowly, with effort, to his feet, and he came around the long table, and he stood before Imara, and he inclined his head, the way men of his generation had been taught to bow only to those they considered above them. The very gesture his entire firm had spent 100 years refusing to people who looked like her. Ems. Okonkwo, he said, on behalf of a name I have spent my whole life believing was honorable, I am sorry. You will have everything you have asked for. And you will have my signature on it before you leave this room. And you will have my word, which is the only thing I have left that is worth anything. That I will spend whatever years I have making sure it is real, and not a press release. Then he straightened, and there were tears standing in the old man's eyes. And he said, "Quieter. My father built this firm. I always told myself he built it for excellence. I see now he built it for people like himself, and called that excellence. You have made me see it. I am 80 years old, and you have made me see it. And I thank you, and I am ashamed. And both of those things are true. There is a thing that happens. Sometimes, when an old certainty finally gives way in a person who has carried it their whole life, and it is not weakness, though it can look like weakness from the outside. It is the opposite. It takes more strength to set down 100 years of inherited comfort at 80 than it takes to carry it, because carrying it is effortless. And setting it down requires you to admit that everything effortless about your life was built on someone else's exclusion. Reginald Halloran set it down in that room, in front of his grandson and his lawyers and a receptionist and a woman he had nearly turned into a footnote. And Imara watched him do it. And she understood that she was watching something rare, rarer than the $500 million, rarer than the clip that had gone around the world. She was watching a man choose, at the very end of his life, to become someone slightly better than he had been. It did not undo what the lobby had done. Nothing would. But it was not nothing. And Imara had spent her whole life learning to tell the difference between nothing and not nothing, because the not nothing was where every good thing she had ever built had started. Imara reached out and gently took the old man's hand and held it the way you hold the hand of someone who has finally arrived somewhere late, but arrived nonetheless. There was one more thing Imara did, and she did it quietly and told almost no one, because it was the thing that mattered most to her, and therefore the thing she least wanted turned into a press release. A year after the morning in the lobby, on the anniversary of her father's death, she drove out of the city to the town where she had grown up, to the old plant where Joseph Vance had stood on the line for 40 years. Counting his own minutes, the plant had closed a decade earlier. The way such plants do, the work had gone elsewhere, and the town had been left to figure out what it was without the thing that had defined it. And the building stood empty behind a chain-link fence, its windows broken, its parking lot cracked and growing weeds. Imara stood at the fence for a long time, with her father's stopwatch in her hand, and looked at the place that had used his brilliance for 40 years, and never once let him into the offices above the floor. And then she bought it, the whole plant, the land, the broken building, for a sum that meant nothing to her and everything to the town. She did not turn it into a monument. Her father would have hated a monument. She turned it into a school, a free one, a training center for the kind of work the new economy actually paid for, technology and finance and the trades, open to anyone in the town and the towns around it. And she put a single condition into its founding documents, which was that no one who applied could ever be turned away on the basis of how they looked when they walked through the door. Everyone who came in got the same chair, the same forms, the same minute of someone's full attention. She named it the Joseph Vance Center. And over the entrance, in plain letters, she had them carve the only words that mattered. Everyone gets counted here. At the opening, she did not give a long speech. She stood in the lot where her father had parked for 40 years, in front of the building that had used him and discarded him. And she held up the stopwatch so the small crowd could see it, the brass catching the same light it had caught in the lobby a year before. And she said only this: "My father stood here for 40 years. He was the smartest man I ever knew. And they never let him upstairs. Not once. In 40 years. Because of what they decided about him the first time he walked in the door, he kept his dignity anyway. He counted his own minutes when they would not count them honestly. And he taught me to do the same. And that is the whole of what built everything you have ever read about me." She looked at the building. They used his hands and threw away his mind. So I bought the place where they did it. And I am giving the mind back to this town, to every child in it who was ever going to be looked at the wrong way the first time they walked through a door. She pressed the crown of the stopwatch and let it run. "The clock starts now," she said. "And this time, every minute counts." The program they built downtown was called, at Imara's suggestion, the Counted Initiative. After her father, and his stopwatch, and his 40 years of counting his own minutes because no one would count them for him. It launched within the year, funded by Halloran Brandt, and soon after, by 11 other firms, who saw which way the wind had turned and did not wish to be the next lobby in the next clip. Its board was independent, its auditors were anonymous, and its first report, published the following spring, was a document so unsparing that 3 firms restructured their entire client intake operations within a month of reading it. Halloran Brandt's own numbers were in that report. On the first page, unredacted, exactly as Imara had demanded. Reginald Halloran insisted on it personally. He said a confession with the worst part left out was not a confession. He had learned that, he said, from a woman with a stopwatch. Courtney stayed. She trained. And then she taught. And within 2 years, she ran the firm's entire front-of-house operation. And she was famous inside the building for a single rule she enforced without exception, that every person who walked through the door received the same chair, the same forms, the same warmth, the same minute of someone's full attention, and that anyone caught doing the half-second arithmetic in the lobby answered to her. She kept a photograph at her desk that she had asked Imara's permission to display. It was a picture of an old man on an assembly line, holding a brass stopwatch. Underneath it, Courtney had written 4 words in her own hand. "Everyone gets counted here. Bradford did the work." It did not transform him overnight, because nothing does. And there were days he resented the report, and days he resented Imara, and days he wanted to call the whole thing performative and be done with it. But he kept funding it when it embarrassed him, which it did, repeatedly, for years. And somewhere in the keeping, he became the different man Imara had described, not because he had decided to be good, but because he had stopped, every single day, doing the one small thing that had been so easy and so comfortable. He never told anyone to crawl to the credit union again. Years later, he told an interviewer that the most important thing that had ever happened to him was being humiliated in his own lobby by a woman he had tried to humiliate first, and that he hoped, when he was an old man, to have earned the right to bow to her the way his grandfather had. And there was Renata. Imara found her. It took months, and a private investigator, and a great deal of patience, because Renata had left no record at Halloran Brandt, having never been allowed to fill out a form. But Imara found her, and wrote to her, and told her what she had witnessed from the corner chair that morning. The two women became, against all the odds of how they met, something like friends. When the state legislature took notice of the counted reports and formed a committee to consider whether the rules governing financial firms ought to require what the initiative had been measuring voluntarily, they asked Imara to testify. She agreed, on one condition, which she did not announce in advance. The hearing room was paneled and solemn and full. The committee sat in a curved row above the witness table, and behind Imara, the public seats were packed with reporters and advocates and a fair number of executives from firms who wanted very badly to know whether they were about to be regulated. Imara took her seat at the witness table, and she set her father's brass stopwatch on the table in front of the microphone, where the cameras could see it. And when they asked her to begin, she did not begin with herself. "I want to introduce you to someone," she said. "With me today is a woman named Renata Diaz." She stood, and beside her in the public seats a woman stood too. The same woman who had once carried a folder pressed to her chest out of a marble lobby and said thank you to the person who turned her away 18 months ago. Imara told the committee. Ms. Diaz walked into the same lobby I walked into. On the same morning, carrying the inheritance her late mother had left her. The first money her family had ever had a chance to invest rather than simply spend on staying alive. She was turned away in under a minute. She was told to try somewhere more her size. She thanked the woman who turned her away, because she had been taught, as so many of us are taught, that the rooms are right about us, and we are wrong to expect more. She left, and she invested her mother's money somewhere smaller, somewhere that charged her more and served her less. Imara paused. I had a document in my portfolio that morning worth $500 million. That is the only reason you have ever heard this story. That is the only reason that lobby was ever held to account. Ms. Diaz had a folder pressed to her chest, and a dead mother's savings. And if I had not happened to be sitting in the same corner on the same morning, no one in this room would ever have known her name. I think that is the actual injustice, not what was done to me. I am fine. I was always going to be fine. What was done to her? Quietly, with a smile, in under a minute, with no one watching and no document to make anyone care. That is the injustice, and it happens 10,000 times every morning in this state alone, and almost none of it is ever counted. The room was silent. Renata sat down, and Imara sat down, and she picked up her father's stopwatch and pressed the crown and let it run. There at the witness table, the thin second hand sweeping in front of the microphone. And she said, "My father carried this for 40 years because no one would count his minutes honestly. So he counted them himself. I am asking you to count. I am asking you to make counting the law, so that the Renatas of this state do not have to depend on the accident of a billionaire happening to share their corner on the right morning. Dignity should not be a thing a person can only afford if they happen to be carrying $500 million. It should be the floor. It should be the door everyone comes through. That is all I am asking. Make it the law that everyone gets counted." When she finished, there was a silence. And then, against every rule of the room, the public seats began to applaud. And the chair did not gavel them down. The bill that came out of that committee was not perfect, because bills never are. But it required disclosure. It required intake transparency. It required that firms above a certain size submit to exactly the kind of independent audit the Counted Initiative had pioneered. And it passed. And it was signed. And it was named, in the final language, after the initiative that had made it necessary. Renata Diaz was in the gallery when it passed. She had, by then, moved her mother's remaining money to Diane Okafor's firm, where it was treated as her mother's money, and she had taken a job at Amara's quiet recommendation and entirely on her own merits, helping to run the very program that audited the lobbies, so that the woman who had once been turned away in under a minute now spent her days making sure the doors stayed open for everyone who came after her. Imara placed her mandate, and it did well, and she placed others after it. And Sovereign Meridian grew into something her father could not have imagined from his place on the line. But the thing she came to value most was not the growth. It was a smaller thing, and a quieter one. It was the letters. They began to arrive within months of the first counted report, and they never stopped. Letters from women who had sat in corners with no document to lay down, who had been told to try somewhere more their size, who had walked out of marble lobbies with their dignity in their hands and nothing else, and who had seen the clip, or read the report, or simply heard that somewhere a woman had held up a stopwatch and made a room reverse itself. They wrote to say that they had stopped believing the rooms when the rooms told them they were no one. They wrote to say they were counting now. 2. They wrote to say thank you. Imara answered everyone. She answered them in her own hand, because she had learned that a typed reply was its own kind of dismissal. And to each woman she wrote a version of the same thing, the thing her father had given her on a stopwatch worn smooth with 40 years of his thumb. When a room decides you are no one, she wrote, the room is telling you the truth about itself, not about you. Keep your dignity intact. Keep counting. The truth has a way of coming out. And when it does, you want to be standing exactly where you always belonged, calm and unbowed, and entirely yourself. One letter she kept on her desk for the rest of her life. It came from a girl of 19, who wrote that she had been the only person who looked like her in a room full of people interviewing for something she had wanted her whole life, and that she had felt the room do the arithmetic on her the second she walked in. The coat, the face, the downgrade, and that she had felt herself start to shrink, start to apologize for taking up the chair, start to believe the thing the room had already decided. And then, the girl wrote, she had thought of the woman with the stopwatch, whom she had only ever seen in a clip on her phone, and she had thought, she does not shrink, so I will not shrink. and she had sat up straight and kept her dignity and answered every question as though she belonged there. Because she did. She got the position. At the bottom of the letter she had written, "I don't have a stopwatch, but I count now. Every time a room tries to tell me who I am, I count, and I wait, and I stay myself until the truth comes out. Thank you for showing me it could come out. Years passed. The way they do. Faster near the end than the beginning. The Joseph Vance Center grew. Its first graduating class scattered out into the world, carrying what the town had once thrown away. And some of them came back to teach. And the broken building that had used her father's hands and discarded his mind filled up, year after year. With young people no one would ever again be permitted to turn away at the door. Imara went out for every graduation. She was an old woman herself by some of the later ones. Slower on the stairs. Her father's age, and then past it. And she would sit in the front row and watch the young people walk across the stage where the assembly line had once stood. And she would hold the stopwatch in her lap and run it and count. At one of those graduations, near the end, a young man crossed the stage and accepted his certificate. And then, instead of walking off, he stopped, and he turned to the front row, and he found Imara, and he came down off the stage to where she sat. He was perhaps 20, in a borrowed suit, the first in his family to finish anything like this. He knelt down so they were eye to eye, the way you do with someone you love who has grown small with age. And he said, "Ms. Okonkwo, I know you don't know me, but my grandmother got a letter from you. Years ago. She used to read it to me when I was small. She said a woman held up a watch in a marble room and made the whole room see her. And that's why I could come here." He swallowed. "She passed last winter. I wanted you to know the letter is still on her wall." He looked at the stopwatch in Imara's hands. "Is that it? Is that the watch?" Imara looked at the young man for a long moment. Then she pressed the worn brass crown one more time, and she stopped the count. And she took his hand and pressed the stopwatch into it and closed his fingers over it. "The brass still warm." "It is," she said, "and now it's yours. My father carried it 40 years because no one would count his minutes. I carried it into every room that ever tried to tell me I was nothing. You carry it now." She held his closed hand in both of hers. "When a room decides you are no one," she told him, "the room is telling you the truth about itself, not about you. Keep your dignity. Keep counting. And when your time comes, give it to the next one. That is the only inheritance that ever mattered. It was the only thing my father had to give. And it turned out to be enough to build all of this." She gestured, with her free hand, at the whole room, the whole building, the whole long arc of it. Enough to build all of this. The young man could not speak. He only held the warm brass and the old woman's hands, and nodded, and around them the room rose to its feet, not because anyone had told them to, but because some things ask you to stand, and the whole graduating class, and all their families, stood in the building that had once used a brilliant man's hands and thrown away his mind. And they watched a stopwatch pass from one set of hands to another, counting still, because here is the thing the lobby never understood. The thing that made it so certain, and made it so wrong. They thought the chair in the corner was a place to put a person they had decided was nothing, but a person sitting calmly in a corner, keeping time, keeping their dignity, refusing to shrink, is not nothing. A person like that is the most dangerous thing in any room built on the comfortable lie that some people belong and some people don't. Because sooner or later, in their own time, on their own feet, they stand up, and they hold up what they have always carried. And the whole marble room, all 100 years of it, has to finally see. If this story moved you, take a moment to leave a like so that more people can find it, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next one. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever been made to wait? Made to prove that you belonged somewhere, you already belonged. And what did you carry that kept you calm? I read every single one. I have chosen 2 more stories for you on the screen right now. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next